Welcome to Transit Unplugged. I'm your host, Paul Comfort, and this is another episode of Comfort's Corner, where we look inside the transit industry, what's happening in and around our efforts to respond to and recover from the COVID-19 crisis. And today is our last regular daily episode of Comfort's Corner, the end of the month. This is April 29th and 30th episode. After this, in the month of May, we'll be falling back to a every other week cadence. We already have in place our regular Transit Unplugged half-hour interview show that's reached #1 across the world for public transit CEO interviews, and that will continue. Our episode for May 1st will be the illustrious CEO of LA Metro, Phil Washington, who talked with me last week about their agency, how they're moving forward. It'll be a phenomenal interview. It was a phenomenal interview. It'll be a phenomenal show for you to listen to on May 1st. And then we're going to be doing, as we normally do, the 15th and the 30th of each month will be our regular Transit Unplugged half-hour interview show with the CEO. And then in the intervening weeks, every other week, we'll have an episode of Comfort's Corner where we're going to talk about headline news like we do today in just a moment, where we have a newsmaker interview that maybe is not a CEO of a transit agency, but maybe a thought leader from a think tank like, Eno Center for Transportation, or a CIO, maybe of some agency, who's talking about how their agency is ramping up various aspects of IT, or a maintenance leader who talks about how they're responding to things. And then we'll take a look at our book, The Future of Public Transportation, and the concept of what we're going to be doing long-term in this agency to recover, in our agencies to recover. So this is our final kind of every other day show, and then we'll be going to every other week in between our regular episodes of Transit Unplugged. If you have any questions about that, just email me. I'm at paul.comfort@trapezegroup.com. I'm also happy to help you in your agency. I've had another agency now reach out to me and ask me to appear as a guest of their weekly staff meeting. And I'm happy to do that, especially now that we're doing it over Zoom or Microsoft Teams, where I can just drop in for 15 minutes and give you a kind of a state of the industry and what's happening, best practices that transit agencies are doing across the country to respond to this. Just email me and ask me. And if I can fit it into the schedule, which I probably can do, we'll make it happen, man. Happy to help you. My goal is to be, as you know, a transit evangelist and to help out our transit agencies across the world. And today is no different. We've got this headline news show today, and then right after that, we have an interview with Pierre Racz. I just interviewed him a few moments ago. He is CEO of Genetec, a big firm based out of Montreal that does security for businesses, tech security for businesses and for transit systems. And you're going to want to listen to this because he talks about the efficacy of these thermal scanners that are being proposed for buses. And I think you'll be surprised about what he says. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that. Now, speaking about how transit agencies are responding to what's happening in the recovery efforts, there was an awful article in the Wall Street Journal about it this week. I posted on LinkedIn. Basically, it was concerns expressed by big companies, employers in New York City, that their employees are not going to want to ride transit back to work. And so they're looking for satellite offices out in the suburbs where people can drive to it. And realtors are talking about, their concerns about people riding public transit. And public transit has gotten a bad rap, in my opinion, in New York City. And New York City MTA officials are scrambling to ensure that the New York subway system doesn't turn into what's being called, quote, a rolling petri dish, unquote, for a new wave of coronavirus infections once state officials begin easing the lockdown measures, according to an article today in Mass Transit magazine. With nearly 6 million daily commuters pre-pandemic and not enough space to sneeze, let alone stand several feet apart, there's a growing concern that a return to regular work life will make some strap hangers super spreaders. Rules put in place earlier this month that require subway riders to wear face coverings are expected to remain in place for months to come, officials said. But even with the MTA's best efforts, transit leaders say the public has some responsibility for containing the virus. Interim New York City Transit President Sarah Feinberg said, customers' awareness of and engagement with their own safety will be key to reopening. Everyone in the system will have a role to play in keeping our city healthy. And so, MTA transportation officials have reached out to health experts to determine whether strap hangers, people that hold on to the straps, in the subway, can safely stand less than 6 feet apart if they're all wearing masks. I'm interested in what their take is on that. Get this. I know you already have heard these numbers, but it's just phenomenal when I read it. Subway ridership has fallen by roughly 93% this last month. But projections published by the MTA estimate that number will tick up to 60% by September. And so you're probably aware that there's been thousands of frontline workers who have contracted COVID-19 or been directed to quarantine And the workforce shortage has forced the MTA to reduce subway service by roughly 30% since late March. The MTA heads plan to expand a program to check the temperatures of all transit workers, and Governor Cuomo of New York on Monday of this week announced that 1,000 MTA employees will receive antibody tests this week to estimate how many frontline transit workers have caught the disease. At least 84 MTA employees have died with coronavirus complications, according to officials. And the MTA has hired private contractors to ramp up its cleaning efforts to address the cleanliness issue. The agency plans to expand an initiative launched in March to disinfect each subway car and bus every 72 hours and clean surfaces and stations multiple times a day. Transit officials have even toyed with the idea of installing hand sanitizer dispensers at every subway station, mirroring an initiative announced in Paris earlier this month, but they're wary that New York's riders will damage or destroy the devices. The state doesn't have a timeline yet for easing back into regular life, but Cuomo announced on Monday that restrictions will be relaxed in some upstate areas starting May 15th, but offered no timetable for downstate, which is where New York City is. And they're also trying to address the growing number of homeless people who have turned to mass transit for shelter during the pandemic. And so it is very interesting to see how they are handling it. The city is trying to open up more safe haven beds, they're calling it, prioritized for the most vulnerable, unsheltered New Yorkers. And they're trying to figure out a way to fully respond to this. And of course, they're the largest transit system in America, so we focus on them a little bit because they're looking at solutions which could be applicable to other transit agencies. Other transit systems, let's take a look at Canada. As you're probably aware, as of today, April 29th, there has been no federal help for operating dollars in Canada, unlike America, where the Congress quickly passed $25 billion as part of the CARES Recovery Act for public transit agencies, which is 280% of their FY 2020 allocation. There's been no such help out of Canada. Now, Canada traditionally, though, has not been involved, the federal government, in providing operating dollars. We did a show this week, a nationwide webinar, Trapeze did, where I had the head of a transit system on, and he was, confirming what we've heard, multiple times, that, this is not traditionally the way the federal government in Canada responds. They provide capital dollars, not operating, but they're asking for help with operating dollars, and they're not getting it so far. And so a number of transit agencies are laying off hundreds and even over 1,000 employees. To get this, the city of Edmonton, Alberta says an additional 900 city employees will be temporarily laid off as the city continues to wrestle with the lower demand and financial fallout of COVID-19. How many of those are transit operators? Nearly half of them. That's right. Nearly half of the 900 people will be, public transit drivers. Our buddy Eddie Robar, who heads up Edmonton Transit Services, I've yet to talk to him in the last week about this, but they just announced it. They've adjusted service, urged essential trips only, and suspended fares to preserve service while enhancing safety. Their ridership is down 85% on some of their routes, according to the transit app, which they use. The layoffs will be effective May 4th. And employees who were given notice can redeploy to other departments that are stressed. And the city has not confirmed the length of the temporary layoffs. You probably heard last week, both TransLink and the Toronto Transit Commission announced layoffs and other cost-cutting measures in response to the financial stress caused by the pandemic. I was texting the CEO of TransLink, Kevin Desmond, who's a good friend of mine and has been a frequent guest on our show, just the concerns they have. The Canadian Urban Transit Association, CUDA, and our buddy Marco D'Angelo is the CEO there. They have requested back in March that the federal government provide emergency financial assistance to Canadian transit systems, citing the combination of financial hardship and that riders who continue to take transit during this time, are providing essential services. But they've yet to do it. Marco D'Angelo says, as life adapts to these extraordinary times, we can fly less, we can get takeout or delivery, we can work from home. There are programs to help people affected by these changes. But transit, he says, is one of those things that shouldn't be shut down because despite massive reductions in ridership, it's an essential service for people who do essential work and needs our support. And there was a good article that I tweeted out today. If you get a chance to look at the Eno Center, Rob Puente is the executive director there. He's taking a look at what the stats show. And while the commuter type services are down dramatically, regular bus service is only down about 50%. And so the people that are needing it to go to essential services still make up half our ridership. And so, even though when you average in commuter train, commuter bus, and some of these commuter style services into it, it makes the numbers drop more to 70, 80, 90%. The regular bus services in city, which have always been traditionally the heavy haulers, right? When I was CEO of Baltimore, I had 380,000 passengers a day on 6 different modes. Half of them rode transit, 250,000 drivers, 250,000 passengers, they were on transit. And then the rest were way down. I mean, light rail was 25,000. The subway was 45,000 a day. So 10 times the light rail ridership in Baltimore when I was there was bus versus light rail. So, and the commuter services were even less, right? We had 15,000 people riding 350 motor coaches every day in commuter bus. And a little bit more than that on commuter trains, but the MARC train service. But again, bus service is the behemoth in our cities. And even in cities like Washington, D.C. and other cities, the ridership on buses are still pretty healthy compared to especially, the metro services and the commuter train services. One last bit of news, again, depressing news. We haven't really talked a whole lot about it, but the motor coach industry, right? And motor coach companies, they're the ones that get contracted out. I used to run a motor coach company for Mark Joseph, Yellow Bus, and I ran the Loudoun County commuter bus service and 2 commuter bus services for MTA routes. And, we also got the bulk of our money, right, was from, on our motor coach industry, was from contracts to do charter business, right? Tours, meetings, conferences, movies. We ran the movie, one of the big movies about the Civil War. We transported all these extras out there to the field, Gods and Generals, I think the name was. And but motor coach companies, man, have really suffered a big gut punch. The American Bus Association has released a report showing the effect that COVID-19 is having on the U.S. motor coach industry. And nearly the entire industry is currently shut down in every corner of the country, according to an article in Metro magazine. Most charter and tour companies have closed their doors. Commuter operations have mostly stopped running, and scheduled service operations are operating at about 15% of capacity. The industry is seeing a fallout between 80 to 90% of canceled trips and very few future bookings. It's been bad. My buddy Peter Pantuso, who is president and CEO of the American Bus Association, says this is the worst crisis our industry has ever faced in our more than 100 years of business. And he says we're seeing devastation worse than 9/11, and we've had no help from the federal government. When Congress was handing out $100 billion to airlines, Amtrak, and public transportation, he says they left out the private motor coach industry. And, they're saying that there are, 64,000 motor coach jobs, which could be lost on an annualized basis. The industry would lose nearly $11 billion in sales. And they're talking about 18 to 24 months before it returns to regular ridership. And that lines up with the numbers that I saw. I went back and looked at statistics from the online from the U.S. Transportation Bureau of Statistics to look at the 9/11 recovery from airlines, after 9/11 when they shut down airplanes for a while, and then it took them 18 months or longer to recover their ridership. And that's what they're saying could be similar to the motor coach industry. So again, real concerns about how the transit and public transit industries are recovering, especially motor coaches. And in the country of Canada, they're having to lay off a lot of people as they wait for a potential recovery package. So not a lot of great news today, but it's news that you need to hear because it's what's happening really in this industry. Now stay tuned for our interview with Pierre Racz of Genetec, and then a look at our book, The Future of Public Transportation. There is a future. It's maybe not as bright as it once was, but we are resilient, and our leaders are brilliant in this industry, and they're working on ways to recover. We'll continue to cover that every other week on this Comfort's Corner series as part of the Transit Unplugged podcast. Thanks so much for being with us, and stay safe out there.
This is Mike Bismeyer, Regional Sales Director of Proterra, and this is Mike's Minute. As you know, we talk about random acts of kindness, mentorship, leadership, and other attributes with the hopes that it will inspire you to pay it forward. Well, this is your week. I'd like you to do the inspiring and join me on a kindness challenge. Grab a notepad and a pen and write down 3 things that you think you could do this week to help somebody out or change their perspective. They don't have to cost a thing. They can be simple gestures, simple acts of kindness. As simple as if you're out cutting your lawn, perhaps cut the next door neighbors too, just because. Write a thank you note to a local business that stayed open within your community during the COVID crisis and thank them and their staff for continuing to provide essential service. Simple acts of kindness are often the most appreciated. This past Easter, my wife and I did some Easter baskets for the shut-in relatives that weren't able to get out. We drove up and dropped them off tied to a 7-foot pole, sure to keep our distance. Everybody got a good laugh. It's times like these when you have to keep a sense of humor, but a simple act can go so far in changing somebody's day. Keep safe, keep kind. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for being with us today on another episode of Comfort's Corner, the Transit Unplugged series, which looks inside the transit industry and how we're responding to the COVID-19 crisis. And today, I'm excited to have the CEO of the big company Genetec on with us, Pierre Racz. Pierre, thanks so much for being our newsmaker interview today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I heard, before we really get into it, I was just talking to Beverly Wilkes, your communications leader, and she was telling me you all had a big webinar lately. So just recently, and like you had thousands and thousands of people on board. A lot of people have canceled their conferences now. I know our company did the same or postponing them, but you decided to turn it into an online event. Tell us a little bit about that. That's pretty awesome.
All right. Well, we called it Connect Digital Experience. It happened last week. We had 8,000 registrants, and it really was in order to replace the trade shows that have been canceled this season. And there were live events. We had panels. We had, for example, in the panel, one of the panels, we had Jonathan Balloon, Vice President of Intel, and he was joined by Brad Brecky. We had the Chief Security Officer of we had a lot of
bigwigs, huh?
A lot of important people, and so then it was a mixture of technical information that we were sending out and interactive conversations. So it was like a virtual trade show. We had our little workstations, and people could come to the workstations and ask specific product questions. Okay. And so not to insult, we had the chief security officer of Uber and the security manager of Starbucks. So it was. And Barclays also was there. I mustn't forget all the guests.
Yes, that's right.
It was a forum where people could share how they're dealing with the crisis and how technology can be applied intelligently to help mitigate the situation.
That's awesome. I know a lot of people are familiar with Genetec, but for those who aren't, can you just give us a little bit about your company and maybe a little about yourself?
Genetec is an engineering company. We're roughly 1,600 strong. 2/3 of the crew are located in Canada, the rest around the world. We have research and development that's mainly done in Quebec, but we also have stuff that's done in France, in England, Austria, the Netherlands, Belgium. And we, again, as I said, we're a software engineering company, and we operate in the physical security space. Our flagship products are video management, access control, license plate recognition, and on which we build the security of security, making sense of your sensors and driving operational efficiency. As far as I'm concerned, I'm an engineer first by vocation, then by training.
Very good. So during this pandemic crisis, how have you been working with transit agencies to assist them? So
we've been helping all our customers, but especially the customers in the public sector. And we've been doing quite a few things. I think that the basic categories of stuff that we were doing is we were supporting experimentation and preventing bad engineering. So our customers. So as an engineer, we make tools, and the best reward we can get is when our customers come up with new ways of using the tools that we didn't imagine. And so an example of this was McCormick Place, which is the large convention center in Chicago, and they came up with the idea of this contagion proximity report. So when someone is suspected of being contagious, then we can ask the access control system who badged in very close temporal proximity to these people. And so then that will give you a list of people that have potentially contracted, been contaminated. And actually, as it turns out, 2 weeks ago, they actually used it on a real live case where someone actually tested positive, announced it at work, and then they went back into where he went through the buildings in the prior couple of days, and was able to provide a list of people that should be careful about self-quarantining themselves. Another thing that we did is we have in our bistro, we don't have any cashier. What we do is we have an honors system where people just badge in and declare what food they've taken. And someone came up with a clever idea of using that as an honor system personal protective equipment dispensary. So we repurposed that for a couple of our customers. So this is used by a variety of our customers that require personal protective equipment, including transit authorities.
Okay.
Another thing that we did for the airports is our airports team built a proximity report based on the real-time location sensing inside of the building. So some of our customers are equipped with ways of locating people inside of a building by triangulating the Wi-Fi, and so then we were able to make proximity reports based on that. In terms of engineering, that's where the thermal cameras come in. We had to help our customers because there's a lot of actually snake oil and ambulance chasing that is going around. The security thermal cameras are really, they don't have generally don't have enough temperature resolution to actually measure a fever. So a lot of them have plus or minus 5 degrees Celsius, which is good to know if you're alive or not.
Right. Yeah.
It's good to know if there's a fire on the tracks, but it's not good enough to sense temperature. There's others that actually have half a degree C of resolution, which is almost good enough. It's good in the sense that you can do it, but sometimes you have to, well, first of all, you have to calibrate them with, black body. That's simple enough to do, but again, the other problem you have is, let's say you have someone that's running after a bus. Well, they're going to be warm because they're running after the bus, and so they'll be denied entrance to the bus for the wrong reasons. Similarly, if they've been waiting in the sun for a long time for the bus, or just long enough, their temperature also will be high. So that's all examples of bad engineering, and certainly I think that people have overhyped what the thermal cameras can do. Now there are some special sensors that are designed to do that. FLIR has a good one, and so that you can integrate, but that's not a security camera. And so I think that one of the things we must do is make sure that our customers use their resources wisely, because they are now in limited supply, both time and money.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, because I've seen that bandied about in lots of articles, that's the next step is to do the thermal cameras and not allow people to board. And you're saying right now the technology isn't that refined.
No, and you're much better off. You're much better off doing simple things that work. I don't know if you saw the interview of Lieutenant General Semonite, but he basically said this is a complicated situation, so only simple solutions will work.
That's good, yeah. And then there's the question of, are people who are asymptomatic still able to pass the virus? And there's a lot of people that say that that's true. And so even if the thermal cameras did work, it would only get some of the people who are potentially able to pass it on and not others who are asymptomatic. So I've wondered about that as well. It's very interesting. Thank you. So what are your thoughts on recovery out of this? So, a lot of places now are kind of at the trough and are coming back out for public transit. Any thoughts on how we can recover from it?
I think that we have an equilibrium to maintain, and one is we need a minimum amount of economic activity, but also we need a minimum amount of hygienic distancing. And so, if we do it too fast, we're going to do it in ways that are not based on science. So people should not go too fast, and we have to take this opportunity to teach people. Unfortunately, there's a lot of noise out there, but like proper use of masks. So if you're going to go in a public transit, wearing a mask is so that you don't contaminate other people. It doesn't matter if you've been tested. If you've been tested positive, there's two reasons why you want to do this. One is we don't know yet if the thing doesn't come back. Two is that it's reassuring to the other people, especially the drivers, who are really putting themselves at risk by exposing themselves to so many potential contamination events. And if you've tested negative, also, that's not necessarily, that doesn't mean that it means you were tested negative when the test occurred, and that could be a day ago, and you might actually been asymptomatic or just fell below the noise floor of the tests yesterday, and today you might be contagious. So wearing a mask is really a new form of politeness. It's interesting how Japan started wearing masks after the 1918 epidemic. And since then, during cold season, they wear this because they are a very polite society.
Yes, that's interesting. Well, thanks. Is there any other thoughts you wanted to share with us before we go today?
No, I hope that everyone stays safe, and that I hope that everyone has learned a little bit more about science. Bill Gates wrote this really interesting article last week that I thought had the best explanation for non-math geeks about how exponential phenomena work. So I highly recommend people read that.
Very good. Thank you, Pierre Racz, CEO of your company, and what an exciting time for you to be able to assist us in the public transit industry and making sure that, like you said, we use sensible, simple tools to help keep our systems safe.
I use public transit, so I need it to be there.
There you go. Thank you. Appreciate you being with us today. Thanks for being with us today on this midweek episode of Comfort's Corner, part of the Transit Unplugged family. And today, as we always do, we like to end the show with a reading from our book, The Future of Public Transportation. It is the hot topic that's on everyone's mind right now, is what will public transportation look like when we come out of this pandemic? So in the book, I wrote an initial chapter on practical improvements, and it was called Make It Work Better. And a big part of, I think, any recovery from transit is to make it work better. A lot of agencies have been involved in or were planning to do a major bus route reboot where they take people where they want to go today, not where they wanted to go 50 years ago. And in the book, in this part one chapter, I talk about how we did that at Baltimore at the MTA, where I was CEO for a couple of years. And I go through a big description of several pages of what we were doing. Today, I want to read from a section I wrote about what went on after we developed the plan, how we implemented it, because I think it will have implications for how we implement whatever new priorities public transit becomes. Some folks are talking about adding in a micro transit feature to take over for some of the lighter use routes. Instead of running heavy buses on those, instead run the lighter, maybe some of the paratransit vehicles. And so there's lots of new ideas floating around about what transit will be. And so I want to read to you today from the book as ideas that you may be able to take from it for your transit system as you implement whatever new ideas you come up with. And it's called From There. It's from page 23 of the book, which is available still online on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You can order a copy of the book, The Future of Public Transportation, either for an electronic digital download or a hard copy. From there, I started with our people and directed the creation of a 5-star customer service training program with 5 levels of competency. We required this training for all of our receptionists, administrative assistants, and others who interacted with the public, including bus operators. We also revamped new employee training to include a day where all new staff, such as IT, finance, media relations, human resources, procurement, engineering, legal, etc., visited the operations facilities and met with employees there to ensure they had at least a basic understanding of what business they were in now. I found that many employees in the administrative functions never visited operations or rode a bus, so I felt they did not have an appreciation for our core business. This one-day bus tour to several garages and the operations control center at the end of their week-long orientation, which was shortened down from the 2 weeks it had been, and many classes moved to self-paced online videos to be completed within the first 90 days of employment, became a favorite for most new employees and took the adage to heart, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I did regular television, radio, newspaper interviews, preparing the public for our upcoming changes. We had developed our own MTA radio station, WTTZ-FM 93.5, to help spread the news and explain the details that regular media might not cover. We also had our own home team, hometown football star, Baltimore Ravens quarterback Joe Flacco, hold a press conference to do interviews and have his likeness on the side of 5 of our buses. His jersey number was 5. We figured this was a way we could get the news about the new service changes and how they would improve trips to our football and baseball stadiums on game days to even the guys who only read the sports page of the newspaper. The Baltimore Symphony Orchestra held mini concerts on our routes to draw attention to how route coverages and route changes would help patrons get to the arts throughout the city. We even had a fare-free information bus travel each and every route of the system on which our service ambassadors, employees, and contractors trained on the new system features would explain the proposed route changes to individual passengers one-on-one and hand out info. For city council and state legislators from the region, our team met with them individually and gave them one-page route comparisons that showed the existing bus routes in their district and the proposed new ones. We took their feedback on routes and made some adjustments. We invited these elected representatives to welcome the public and speak in our community meetings. We also gave them enough copies of the route comparisons that they could provide these to their constituents and have them in their district offices. This enabled the local legislators to be part of the process and have ownership of the new routes and overall Baltimore Link system. Then in June 2017, the MTA ripped the Band-Aid off the old system, and overnight there was a new bus route network with a new name, logo, and design, new bus stop signs, schedules, shelters, websites, buses, and employees, all shining. We had followed our guiding principles, but made smart compromises with community groups and others' feedback by not adjusting some routes where there was significant community pushback. This was our plan, edited by our passengers and key stakeholders, and open to future adjustments as necessary. That's the end of the reading for today, and there's more information about how we did that bus reboot, which a lot of folks are now holding off on doing until they see what the ridership trends look like when people come back on the bus. Encourage you to take a look at that insight as you evaluate what you're going to do in your system going forward. Again, thanks for being with us for today's Comfort's Corner episode. We are switching this format to 3 shows a week to every other week. We're going to do 1 show. It'll be on Wednesdays, and it'll start in May. As I mentioned at the top of the show, our next regular podcast for Transit Unplugged will be on May 1st, in which we'll have Phil Washington as our guest. And then every other week on a Wednesday, you'll hear this Comfort's Corner show, which will be news headlines from the public transit industry, a newsmaker interview, and a look at what the future of public transportation might look like from our book. Thanks so much for being with us. I'm Paul Comfort, wishing you safety and purpose in your life as we continue to help the millions of people who still rely on public transit for their mobility in these trying times. Thank you.